The sun hadn't fully risen over the Nevada desert, yet Staff Sergeant Rachel was already at the armory, kneeling on the cold concrete floor. The hum of fluorescent lights reflected faintly off the polished barrels of rifles neatly lined against the racks. Outside, the wind stirred a dust storm that painted the landscape in shades of orange and brown, but inside, it was silent except for the rhythmic sound of her cloth gliding over the metal, removing fingerprints and traces of last night's humidity. To Rachel, every rifle was more than a weapon. It was a companion, a tool that demanded respect. She ran her fingers along the cold steel, checking for imperfections, imagining the invisible path a bullet would trace, and ensuring that every part functioned flawlessly. Around her, the other soldiers were already stirring. Corporal Dean Hawk leaned casually against the doorway, holding a cup of lukewarm coffee, and smirked as he watched her. Some of the younger troops were boasting about their scores in the previous day's training, the farthest shots they had ever taken, the targets they had hit, the minor victories they used to impress each other. Their voices were loud, brash, and filled with ego, but Rachel didn't react. Her eyes were steady, her movements deliberate. Her hands were skilled and steady, the only sound being the soft scrape of her cleaning cloth against the polished steel. Rachel had always preferred the quiet work. Cleaning rifles was meditative. She could think about nothing and everything at once, letting the repetitive motion center her mind. Discipline wasn't something she learned in a day. It was drilled into her over years of service and hours spent perfecting her craft in the solitude of early mornings like this. It wasn't glory she sought, but perfection. The kind of perfection that meant when the time came, when the target appeared hundreds or thousands of meters away, her body and mind would act as one unit, her shot unstoppable. Dean cleared his throat. "You really spend more time polishing than shooting, don't you?" he said, half mocking, half curious. He took a slow sip of his coffee, letting the words hang in the room. The other soldiers glanced at Rachel, expecting some form of reaction. They had seen her before, quiet, unassuming, precise, but they had never seen her shoot. Some doubted her ability, assuming her skills were only theoretical, built from knowledge rather than experience. Rachel didn't look up. She simply replied, "A rifle isn't just about pulling the trigger. If you can't respect the tool, you can't respect the shot." Her voice was soft, even, but it carried an authority that immediately silenced the room. Dean raised an eyebrow, intrigued more than challenged. He had met plenty of shooters who were flashy, boastful, and loud. He had never met someone who seemed invisible yet radiated such confidence. Minutes passed in silence, punctuated only by the swish of Rachel's cloth. The other soldiers began to lose interest, whispering among themselves until Dean leaned forward slightly. "Ever think about hitting something really far?" he asked, almost rhetorically. "I mean, the kind of shot people say is impossible." Rachel paused for a moment. She set the cloth down, her eyes meeting his for the first time. There was a calm certainty in her gaze that made the bravado in Dean's voice seem small. "Distance isn't impossible," she said quietly. "It's measurable, calculable. Everything else is just variables." Dean smirked, sensing a hint of challenge. "What if I told you there's a target at, let's say 3,800 meters, he said. He emphasized the number slowly, letting it hang in the room like a gauntlet thrown. The other soldiers stifled laughter, assuming this was a joke. No one believed a shot that far could be achieved by someone so quiet, so unassuming. Rachel didn't flinch. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, her hands folding neatly in front of her. "What's the wind like?" she asked, her tone matter-of-fact, betraying no emotion. Dean blinked. He hadn't expected her to take it seriously, and certainly hadn't expected her to treat the challenge with such calm precision. Her question changed the atmosphere. The laughter died, replaced by a low hum of curiosity. The other soldiers leaned in slightly, realizing that she was already thinking in terms of trajectory, air density, temperature, mirage, and bullet velocity, all before a single shot had been fired. Rachel didn't need to see the target yet. She was already preparing for it in her mind, visualizing the conditions, calculating the impossible. Dean leaned back, intrigued and slightly unsettled. He was used to being the center of attention in marksmanship competitions, known for his confidence and the occasional arrogance. He had underestimated Rachel, underestimated the way her quiet focus masked a mind trained to perfection. He could feel a challenge within himself. This was no longer just a joke. It was a test of skill, intellect, and composure. Rachel returned to her rifles, handling each one as if it were a living thing. She polished the stock, checked the barrel for microabrasions, ensured the scope alignment was flawless. She was preparing without words, letting every action build her mental state. The soldiers watched her, fascinated by the ritual. This wasn't arrogance or showmanship. It was mastery. Every motion spoke of patience, attention, and control. She wasn't thinking about fame or recognition. She was thinking about perfection. Dean finally broke the silence. "All right," he said, more serious now, a mix of respect and challenge in his tone. "Let's see if you can actually make it happen." Rachel didn't smile, didn't nod. She simply cleaned the last rifle, set it down with precise care, and stood. Her eyes scanned the armory one last time before she turned toward the door. Every soldier in the room sensed something significant was about to unfold. Outside, the desert waited, endless, vast, and unforgiving. And for Rachel, every variable mattered: wind, gravity, mirage, and her own heartbeat. Today, the quiet woman who polished rifles would step into the realm of the impossible. What seemed like a simple task, a shot beyond the imaginable, was about to become a lesson in patience, skill, and unshakable confidence. The others didn't know it yet, but Rachel wasn't just preparing for a shot. She was about to make history, proving that mastery wasn't about ego or bravado, but about respect, discipline, and focus. And in that quiet moment in the armory, before a single bullet left a barrel, the legend of Rachel began. The Nevada sun had climbed higher now, turning the desert into a shimmering, almost hypnotic landscape. Heat waves rolled across the sand like invisible waves, distorting the view of distant targets and making the task of hitting anything at extreme range seem even more impossible. Rachel stepped out of the armory, her boots crunching softly on the gravel, her rifle in hand. The quiet confidence she carried was palpable, even in the harsh glare of the sun. Corporal Dean Hawk was already at the range, leaning casually against a barricade, sunglasses reflecting the barren terrain ahead. Dean smirked as she approached, his usual cocky swagger amplified by the belief that this would be another easy joke. "You really think you can hit a target at 3,800 meters?" he asked again, his voice louder this time, as if saying it out loud might make the absurd distance feel more achievable. A few soldiers nearby snickered, whispering bets under their breath. Most had already dismissed Rachel's skills. After all, she was the quiet one, the armory ghost who polished rifles while others trained for glory. Rachel didn't flinch. She set her rifle down on the shooting bench, carefully checking every part with mechanical precision. "Distance is a variable," she said simply, her tone calm but carrying an undeniable weight. "It can be measured, calculated, and accounted for. Impossible isn't a thing, it's a mindset." Dean blinked. That calm, almost chilling confidence caught him off guard. He had expected a laugh, a refusal, maybe even a glance that said, "You're insane." Instead, Rachel was already thinking about wind speed, temperature, humidity, and the subtle distortions caused by heat mirages. The kind of calculations most snipers had to scribble on paper for hours, she could perform almost instinctively. "All right then," Dean said, his smirk softening into a serious expression. "Let's make it interesting." He pulled a small steel silhouette target out of his bag, barely visible even from 50 meters, let alone 3,800. "If you hit it, you get full bragging rights. If you miss—" He let the sentence hang, not needing to finish it. The laughter and whispers of nearby soldiers faded as the tension in the air thickened. Rachel adjusted her stance, planting her boots firmly, shoulders squared and eyes scanning the desert floor. She didn't rush. Every sniper she had ever trained, with every lesson drilled into her mind by her father, a veteran who had survived the chaos of Vietnam, whispered patience. A long-range shot wasn't about speed or reflexes. It was about stillness, calculation, and respect for forces beyond human control. The wind, the mirage, the humidity, all mattered. Dean watched, fascinated. He had challenged hundreds of snipers, all of whom had failed spectacularly at extreme distances. Most would panic, relying on instinct over calculation, forcing the rifle to obey them rather than merging with it. But Rachel moved like she was dancing with the rifle, each adjustment precise, deliberate, almost ritualistic. There was a strange beauty to it, like watching an artist sculpt invisible lines across the desert. Range, wind speed, mirage, bullet drop, Rachel muttered softly to herself, her voice barely audible. She pulled out a small wind meter, adjusted the scope, and consulted her mental calculations. Her hands were steady, her breathing measured. To an outsider, it might have seemed like overkill, almost obsessive, but this was what mastery looked like. And she had mastered it in silence, far from the limelight. Dean tried to maintain his composure, but he couldn't hide the flicker of doubt that crossed his features. Could someone really perform such precise calculations without notes, without a team of spotters, without the fanfare of expectation? Rachel was about to prove him wrong, and, to him, she would do it with a quietness that made the achievement almost poetic. Rachel took a deep breath, checking the horizon for visual distortion caused by the shimmering heat. Her first shot would be a test, a feel of the distance and the wind. She positioned the rifle on the bench, aligned the scope with almost surgical precision, and exhaled slowly. The desert seemed to hold its breath with her. She squeezed the trigger. The sound of the rifle firing cracked sharply, echoing across the empty expanse. Dean squinted through his spotting scope. The round sailed through the air, but it was slightly off, a near miss. Whispers broke out among the nearby soldiers. Some shook their heads, already convinced that the quiet sniper was just that, quiet and unproven. Rachel didn't react. She simply noted the deviation, adjusted her calculations, and prepared for the second round. This was part of the process. Nothing more, nothing less. Dean couldn't help but admire her calmness. Most shooters would have cursed or stomped their feet. Most would have let ego interfere. Not Rachel. She was a machine of precision and patience, her focus unshakable. She exhaled slowly, recalibrated her aim, and squeezed the trigger again. The second round cut through the shimmering air, hitting the target just slightly off-center. Dean's eyebrows rose. His smirk was gone. Now there was curiosity and a little unease. Rachel didn't celebrate or react outwardly. She only made a minor adjustment in the scope, her expression serene. Her hands never trembled. Her mind never wavered. Every calculation was methodical, each movement flowing into the next, like the desert wind itself had taken control of her rifle. The third shot was different. There was no hesitation. She exhaled, squeezed, and the round left the barrel. The wind seemed to pause. The heat shimmer rippled, and then thunk. The steel target rattled violently. Dead center. A perfect hit. 3,800 meters. The impossible had been achieved. For a moment there was silence, the kind that stretches time. Dean looked through his scope, disbelief etched across his features. The soldiers around the range froze, jaws dropping. Some couldn't even clap or cheer. They were too stunned. Rachel lowered the rifle, wiped it clean with the same meticulous care as she had before, and said softly, "Needs a new firing pin." There was no boast, no flourish. Just the calm, quiet presence of someone who had done what they were trained to do perfectly. Dean approached her slowly, his earlier confidence replaced by a mixture of awe and respect. "That was unbelievable," he admitted. "I didn't think anyone could." He stopped, realizing words couldn't fully capture what he had just witnessed. Rachel only smiled faintly, her eyes still scanning the horizon as if she were already thinking about the next shot. Around the range, whispers became a hum of admiration. Soldiers talked quietly, careful not to disturb the moment. This wasn't just a shot. It was a lesson in discipline, skill, and focus. The legend of Rachel, the quiet armory ghost who had made the impossible possible, had officially begun. For Rachel, however, it wasn't about fame. She packed up her rifle, returning it to its case with the same reverence she had always shown. The desert wind blew past her. stirring the dust at her boots, and she walked away with the calm assurance of someone who knew mastery was measured in preparation, patience, and respect, not applause. Even Dean, once arrogant and cocky, felt humbled. He had witnessed something extraordinary, a sniper who didn't need ego, who didn't crave recognition, and who proved that focus and discipline could overcome what most deemed impossible. And deep down, he knew that he would never forget the quiet confidence in Rachel's eyes as she faced the impossible, nor the soundless power of a shot that limits. The sun climbed higher and the desert stretched endlessly before them. But for Rachel, the distance was never the enemy. It was a canvas, waiting for the precision of a mind and hands perfectly in sync. And today, she had painted a masterpiece. The desert stretched endlessly, a vast ocean of heat and dust, as Staff Sergeant Rachel adjusted her position on the shooting bench. The sun blazed overhead, shimmering off the sand and creating a mirage that distorted the horizon. Even from 100 meters away, the target seemed small, almost unreal, like a distant dot on the vast canvas of the Nevada desert. But Rachel didn't flinch. She had trained her mind and body for this, every movement deliberate, every calculation precise. Her rifle rested on the bench, perfectly aligned with her shoulder. The stock pressed against her cheek with intimate familiarity. She could feel the subtle vibrations of the desert wind and the shifting mirage in her peripheral vision. To any observer, it might have seemed like overkill, that her meticulous adjustments were excessive. But Rachel knew that at 3,800 meters, even the slightest miscalculation would render her efforts futile. Every factor mattered: wind velocity, humidity, barometric pressure, mirage, and even the spin drift of the bullet over extreme distance. Dean Hawk had returned from the armory, his earlier smirk replaced by quiet curiosity. He leaned against a barricade, arms folded, watching Rachel with an intensity he had never directed toward anyone before. He had seen plenty of shooters at extreme ranges, and he knew how easy it was to fail spectacularly. But Rachel was different. She moved with a calm precision that betrayed not only talent but years of discipline and experience. Rachel pulled out a small wind meter from her pack and held it aloft, letting the current play across her fingers. Numbers flashed in her mind: wind direction, speed, gusts, subtle changes in temperature that could distort the bullet's path. She murmured to herself softly: angle of deviation, spin drift, trajectory adjustment. Her voice was barely audible, yet every word carried the weight of careful calculation. Dean whispered to himself, impressed despite himself. He had underestimated her. Most people assumed that someone so quiet and methodical couldn't possibly excel under pressure. Yet Rachel exuded confidence that came not from ego, but from preparation. She didn't need to prove herself to anyone. This wasn't about glory. It was about mastery, the same mastery that had led her to spend countless hours cleaning rifles in the armory, learning the subtle language of the weapon she wielded. The first round of shots had already given her some information. Her previous attempt had been slightly off, a miss by a fraction of a degree. Most snipers would have reacted with frustration, but Rachel merely noted the deviation and recalculated. She adjusted the scope with delicate precision, tightening screws, aligning crosshairs, and compensating for every microvariable. She checked the wind again, this time holding the meter in the opposite direction to ensure accuracy. Her mind moved faster than the eye could follow. Trajectory, elevation, and bullet drop were all computed in an instant. Every factor was accounted for: the temperature of the barrel, the powder burn, the atmospheric pressure, even the effect of the rising sun on her vision. The rifle was an extension of her body, her senses integrated with the machine. She didn't rely on instinct alone. She relied on knowledge, calculation, and unwavering focus. The other soldiers were watching silently now, mesmerized. Some whispered to each other, questioning what they were seeing. Dean stepped closer, unable to resist the magnetic pull of her concentration. "How do you do it?" he asked quietly. He wasn't seeking to challenge her, he was genuinely curious. Rachel didn't answer. Words were unnecessary. Every motion, every adjustment, every minute focus of her mind was a demonstration in itself. She took a deep, controlled breath, centering herself. At this distance, even her heartbeat mattered. Any tension in her muscles could affect the rifle's alignment and the bullet's path. She had practiced this countless times, sometimes at extreme ranges, sometimes in simulated desert conditions, sometimes simply by imagining the bullet's trajectory in her mind and visualizing a perfect hit. Today, all that preparation would come to fruition. Rachel's eyes scanned the horizon through the scope. The target was still a tiny speck, but she had measured and remeasured its position, compensating for the curvature of the earth and the subtle deflection caused by the spin of the round. She adjusted her position slightly, ensuring her shoulder, cheek, and spine were perfectly aligned. Even the way she gripped the stock was intentional, allowing minimal recoil to interfere with subsequent shots. Dean watched her with a mixture of awe and anxiety. He had never seen such meticulous preparation. Most snipers relied on confidence and muscle memory, but Rachel's precision was almost surgical. She wasn't just aiming, she was merging her calculations with the rifle, the desert, and the environment itself. Every factor had a purpose. Every micro-adjustment mattered. Then came the moment of truth. Rachel exhaled slowly, allowing her body to settle completely. The desert seemed to quiet itself as she focused, the air shimmering in the heat, the wind teasing at the distance. She slowly squeezed the trigger. The rifle discharged, a sharp echo bouncing across the desert. Dean's eyes followed the bullet through the spotting scope. The first shot had gone slightly wide. Rachel didn't flinch. She already knew the data, how far off the trajectory had been, how the wind had shifted mid-flight. She adjusted her scope minutely, recalculated the spin drift, and accounted for subtle changes in air density. This wasn't frustration, it was information. The rifle had spoken and she had listened. Her second shot cut the distance more accurately, grazing the target's edge. Dean's jaw tightened, his respect growing. He had been certain she would fail, or at least produce a near miss, but Rachel's calm precision was undeniable. She didn't celebrate or acknowledge her near-perfect shot. Instead, she prepared for the third round with the same deliberate care as before. Every motion was exact. She exhaled slowly, letting the breath steady her body. She aligned the scope one final time, compensating for the smallest variables. The wind's slight oscillation, the mirage caused by heat rising off the desert floor, the tiny curvature of the earth over the 3,800-meter span. The desert seemed to stretch endlessly, a test of patience and intellect, but Rachel was ready. The third round left the barrel in a near-silent rhythm, cutting through the desert air. Dean followed through his scope and the shot struck true, dead center. The steel target rattled violently. For a moment there was silence. Not a single sound, save the faint hum of the desert wind. The impossible had been achieved. Rachel lowered the rifle, cleaned it meticulously, and quietly said, "Needs a new firing pin." No celebration, no bravado, just quiet confidence. The soldiers around the range whispered in disbelief, while Dean approached her, a mixture of awe and respect etched into his face. This was more than a shot. It was a statement. Discipline, patience, and preparation could overcome even the most impossible odds. Rachel had done what few had ever attempted and fewer had achieved, and she had done it with quiet mastery, leaving everyone who witnessed it humbled and inspired. The legend of Rachel was no longer confined to whispered stories in the armory. Today it was official. She had merged skill, intelligence, and precision into a single, unforgettable act. And as she packed her rifle and walked away, the desert stretching endlessly before her, one truth was clear: Rachel didn't just shoot. She calculated, she respected, and she conquered. The desert stretched endlessly, shimmering under the noon sun, a vast ocean of sand and heat that seemed to mock anyone daring enough to measure distance against it. Staff Sergeant Rachel stood at the firing bench, her rifle steady in her hands, scope aligned with meticulous precision. Her previous two shots had provided invaluable data, the first slightly off, the second grazing the target. But this third shot, the culmination of her preparation and focus, would be decisive. Everyone watching, from fellow soldiers to Corporal Dean Hawk, could feel the tension crackling in the air. Rachel's calm demeanor belied the monumental challenge ahead. At 3,800 meters, even a minor miscalculation would render the shot futile. The wind, shifting subtly, could deflect the bullet by meters. The mirage caused by rising heat could distort the target's appearance. But Rachel had accounted for every variable she could detect. Her calculations were precise, her patience infinite. She adjusted the scope one last time, aligning crosshairs with the steel target that appeared impossibly distant, almost ethereal in the shimmering desert heat. Dean watched from the barricade, his earlier confidence replaced by a mixture of awe and disbelief. He had challenged hundreds of snipers, but few had approached this with Rachel's quiet mastery. She didn't rush. She exhaled slowly, letting her heartbeat settle. Each breath, each muscle movement was controlled, deliberate. She wasn't merely pulling a trigger. She was merging her body, mind, and weapon into one seamless unit, synchronized with the forces of nature itself. The soldiers nearby whispered, barely daring to speak. Some had dismissed her initially, assuming her quiet demeanor meant lack of skill. Others had watched in awe as her first 2 rounds demonstrated precision that expectations. Now, as she prepared for the third shot, all eyes were on her. The tension was tangible, a collective anticipation that seemed to suspend the very desert air. Rachel's fingers tightened on the trigger, not with force but with intention. She exhaled once more, letting her entire being focus on the task at hand. The rifle was an extension of her body, each micro-adjustment informed by years of training, calculation, and intuition. She compensated for the faint crosswind, the sun's glare, the slight mirage, and even the barrel's temperature. Every detail mattered. Every factor counted. Dean, still observing, couldn't hide the flicker of doubt creeping across his features. Could someone really master such an extreme shot? Could discipline, patience, and calculation truly overcome the impossibility of distance? Rachel was about to answer that question definitively. Her finger squeezed the trigger. The rifle discharged with a sharp crack, the sound echoing across the desert like a gunshot in a cathedral. The bullet sailed through the shimmering air, a silver streak against the golden horizon. Dean followed it through his spotting scope, and the other soldiers held their collective breath. The first 2 attempts had been exercises in adjustment, but this shot was final. Time seemed to stretch as the round cut through the desert heat, guided by gravity, wind, and Rachel's perfect calculations. Dean's eyes widened as the target approached, the steel silhouette faint but visible through the scope. Then thunk. The steel target rattled violently. Dead center. A perfect hit. 3,800 meters. The impossible had been achieved. For a moment the desert was silent, as if it too were acknowledging the feat. The soldiers froze, unable to clap, cheer, or even breathe properly. Dean slowly lowered his scope, disbelief etched into his face. He had witnessed something extraordinary. The quiet armory ghost, the unassuming staff sergeant, had done what most had considered unattainable. Rachel lowered her rifle, set it down carefully, and wiped it clean with the same meticulous care she had shown since she entered the armory. "Needs a new firing pin," she said softly, her voice calm, almost casual, as if nothing extraordinary had just occurred. There was no celebration, no flourish, no boastful gesture, just quiet mastery. The soldiers around her whispered among themselves, awe in every word. Some stared in disbelief. Some shook their heads, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Dean approached her slowly, his earlier arrogance replaced by respect. I don't even know what to say," he admitted. That was incredible." Rachel gave a small nod, her eyes already scanning the horizon for any subtle changes in the mirage, any shift in the wind. Her mind never truly rested, even after achieving what many would consider impossible. To her, this wasn't about fame, recognition, or ego. It was about precision, discipline, and respect for the craft. Every shot was a meditation, a conversation between her, the rifle, and the world around her. Dean studied her for a moment, then extended a hand. "I misjudged you," he said quietly. "You're something else entirely." Rachel shook his hand, her grip firm and calm, her gaze steady. She didn't respond with words. Her actions had already spoken volumes. For the rest of the day, the desert seemed transformed. What had once been an ordinary training range now felt sacred, a place where the impossible had been realized. The soldiers who witnessed it would carry the memory forever, the sight of Rachel, quiet and unassuming, performing a feat that expectations, a shot that seemed almost mythic in its perfection. Rachel herself returned to her routine, cleaning the rifle once more, checking its components with the same care and reverence as before. To any observer, it might have seemed redundant, unnecessary even, but Rachel knew that mastery was never complete. Even after hitting the impossible, she maintained her discipline. This was her philosophy: respect the tool, respect the process, and the results would follow. Dean couldn't stop watching her. He had challenged many, trained with many, but he had never encountered someone like Rachel. There was no ego, no showmanship, no need for recognition, just skill, patience, and unshakable focus. And in that moment, he realized that what he had witnessed wasn't just a sniper hitting a target. It was a lesson in humility, discipline, and the extraordinary power of quiet confidence. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert, Rachel packed her rifle carefully, ensuring every part was properly maintained. She walked back toward the base, her steps measured and calm, leaving behind a group of soldiers forever changed. The legend of her impossible shot would spread across the base, whispered in awe, retold with admiration. And yet for Rachel, it was just another day, another demonstration of preparation, patience, and mastery. She didn't seek applause or accolades. She sought perfection, and in that desert, against impossible odds, she had found it. The impossible shot had been made, and the world, or at least the small circle of soldiers who had witnessed it, would never forget the quiet woman who had achieved it. Word of Rachel, impossible shot, traveled quickly across the base, like sparks igniting dry brush. What had begun as whispers among soldiers in the training range soon became hushed conversations in the mess hall, the barracks, and even the administrative offices. The quiet sniper, who cleaned rifles and avoided the spotlight, had done what many deemed unattainable: a flawless hit at 3,800 meters. By the afternoon, her name had circulated through the chain of command, and soon, officers and instructors alike were eager to witness the woman who had made history in the Nevada desert. The soldiers who had watched the shot unfold that morning were still in awe. They replayed the moment in their minds, the calm precision, the meticulous calculations, the utter control of a young woman who seemed ordinary in every other aspect of her life. Corporal Dean Hawk, who had issued the challenge, and initially believed it would be a joke, found himself humbled. He had spent years boasting of his own long-range skills, yet he had underestimated the quiet genius of Rachel. He could not help but respect her, and the realization unsettled him more than he expected. By the next day, the story had spread beyond the immediate circle. Rumors of her achievement reached other training bases, circulated among elite snipers, and even trickled into informal military forums where sharpshooters compared notes on extreme-range performance. Everyone spoke of her calm demeanor, her obsessive preparation, and the precision that allowed her to conquer what most considered impossible. Soldiers began referring to her by a nickname she would never claim: the Armory Angel. Rachel, for her part, was unmoved by the growing attention. She returned to her routines with the same discipline she had always maintained. The rifles needed cleaning. The charts required updating. The wind and mirage needed to be accounted for in preparation for the next challenge. Fame, attention, or recognition were irrelevant to her. Her purpose was mastery, mastery of herself, her weapon, and the environment. And mastery, she knew, was never complete. Despite her indifference to accolades, the base command could not ignore her achievement. Requests were made for interviews, for demonstrations, for training sessions where Rachel would share her technique. Media outlets contacted the base, eager for a story about the sniper who had achieved the impossible. Her colleagues were thrilled by the attention, but Rachel declined politely every offer. To her, the shot had been a personal triumph, not a public spectacle. She did not need to explain it. The rifle, the desert, and her discipline had already done the talking. Dean observed all of this with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. He had initially challenged her as a joke, never expecting her to succeed. Yet now, he found himself fascinated by the way Rachel carried herself. Unlike other sharpshooters, she did not flaunt her skills or demand recognition. She allowed her work to speak for itself, and in doing so, she had achieved something far more profound than a single perfect shot. She had earned the respect of those who truly understood her craft. The legend spread beyond the military as well. Within informal circles of military enthusiasts, bloggers, and firearm aficionados, stories of her extraordinary achievement began appearing. They described the impossible shot, the meticulous calculations, and the serene calm with which Rachel executed it. Videos of her routine in the armory, the quiet polishing of rifles, the focused adjustments, the careful attention to every detail became subjects of fascination. Yet true to her nature, Rachel did not seek these stories. She remained an enigma, a quiet master whose actions spoke louder than words. Within the base, younger soldiers began to study her methods. They observed how she handled the rifle, how she accounted for environmental variables, and how she maintained composure under pressure. Some attempted to emulate her focus and discipline, but most quickly realized that her precision was not just technique. It was a mindset cultivated over years of training, reflection, and patience. Rachel's quiet presence became a silent teacher. Her influence, subtle yet profound, reshaped the culture around extreme marksmanship on the base. Dean, now more than a spectator, approached her one afternoon. "I've never seen anyone do what you just did," he admitted, his usual bravado replaced by sincerity. "It's not just the shot. It's how you do it, how calm you are, how precise. It's intimidating." Rachel looked up briefly from her rifle, her expression calm. "It's not about intimidation," she said softly. "It's about preparation. The shot doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the variables, the environment, the rifle, and the bullet. I just align them." Her humility impressed Dean even more. Here was someone who had achieved what few could even dream of, yet she claimed no ownership over it. She had mastered the tools, the environment, and herself, and yet she remained grounded, focused, and disciplined. For Dean, this lesson was as significant as witnessing the shot itself. He realized that Rachel's mastery was not only technical but philosophical, an understanding of harmony between human skill and nature. As the days passed, more and more soldiers sought her guidance, asking questions about ballistics, wind, mirage, and even mental focus. Rachel would answer quietly, never imposing her methods, but allowing them to discover through observation and careful instruction. She became a mentor in the truest sense, guiding others without seeking praise, shaping the next generation of sharpshooters while maintaining her own serene detachment. The story of the 3,800-meter shot grew into legend, shared around campfires, training ranges, and in whispered stories passed from one unit to another. Rachel became a symbol of quiet mastery, the embodiment of patience, preparation, and humility. Soldiers marveled not just at her skill, but at her demeanor. She had achieved something extraordinary, and yet carried it with the grace of someone who had done nothing remarkable at all. Even Dean found himself transformed. He had once approached her with challenge and mockery, only to be humbled by her skill and composure. Now, he watched her with respect bordering on reverence. She had proven that the extraordinary could be achieved not through arrogance or bravado, but through dedication, observation, and unshakable focus. And in doing so, she had left a mark that would linger long after the desert wind had carried away the echoes of her shots. By the end of the week, Rachel returned to her normal routines. The rifles were cleaned, charts updated, and the armory returned to its quiet stillness. Yet the legend remained. Soldiers still whispered her name. Dean still observed her with admiration. The story of the impossible shot continued to inspire those who heard it, demonstrating that true mastery was measured not by fame or recognition, but by the quiet pursuit of perfection. For Rachel, the accomplishment was only a milestone, a confirmation of discipline, skill, and patience. She walked through the armory each day with calm assurance, her presence a reminder to all that excellence required preparation, humility, and focus. And though the legend of the 3,800-meter shot grew with every retelling, Rachel remained unchanged, a master of her craft who needed no applause, only the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had achieved the impossible. The desert had quieted after the whirlwind of excitement surrounding her impossible shot, but for Staff Sergeant Rachel, the journey had never truly begun with that single act. She walked through the armory, cleaning rifles with the same meticulous care, her mind drifting, as it often did, to memories that had shaped her skill, her focus, and her unshakable calm. To the soldiers who admired her, she seemed like a living legend, but to Rachel, every perfect shot was the sum of lessons learned long before she ever picked up a rifle. Her earliest memories were of her father, a Vietnam veteran who carried the weight of his experiences in silence. He taught her the importance of discipline, patience, and respect for the weapon. "Control your mind," he would say, "and your hands will follow." Those words became a mantra, one she repeated silently in moments of preparation and challenge. He never sugar-coated the realities of life, nor the responsibility that came with wielding power in any form. He impressed upon her that mastery was not about recognition or ego, but about understanding the tools, the environment, and oneself. Rachel remembered sitting on the porch as a child, her small hands holding her father's old rifle while he guided her gently. She would trace the barrel, inspect the stock, and memorize the sights. Her father didn't allow rushing. Every movement was deliberate. Every lesson required observation and thought. Sometimes she would fidget, impatient to fire, but he would calm her with a simple reminder: the shot isn't in the bullet. The shot is in the preparation. Over the years, Rachel honed these lessons into second nature. She absorbed knowledge like a sponge, not only about rifles but also about the natural forces that could influence a shot. Wind, mirage, humidity, and gravity, all were variables she had learned to anticipate. She spent hours in the backyard with homemade targets, gradually increasing the distance until every shot became a lesson in discipline. By the time she enlisted, her skill had already been forged through years of practice, patience, and reflection. Her life in the military further refined her abilities. Training missions, survival exercises, and long-range drills became a crucible that tested not only her skill but her mental fortitude. In stressful scenarios when others faltered, Rachel's calmness became her greatest weapon. Every shot was preceded by a sequence of checks: breathing, grip, scope alignment, environmental assessment, and internal focus. Where others might rush or rely on instinct, she relied on calculation and observation, letting intuition flow naturally from preparation. The impossible shot at 3,800 meters was not a sudden act of brilliance, but the culmination of decades of preparation. Each calculation, each adjustment she had made that day, echoed the lessons she had learned from her father and refined through relentless practice. She visualized every variable, accounted for every change in wind and mirage, and allowed her mind to merge with the rifle. It was a dance of precision, one that few could understand, and even fewer could replicate. Dean Hawk had begun to sense the depth of her skill. Initially, he had believed her calm demeanor masked inexperience, but now he realized it was mastery, the kind of mastery that could not be faked or rushed. "It's not just the shot," he confessed one afternoon during a casual range session. "It's everything: how you prepare, how you think, how you stay calm." Rachel merely nodded, her eyes calm, her focus unwavering. She understood that true skill was invisible to those who only watched results. It was built in the quiet moments, in the repetition, in the unseen labor of preparation. Rachel often reflected on the balance between patience and action. She understood that a shot, any shot, no matter how distant, was the result of accumulated knowledge, careful observation, and steady nerves. One miscalculation could render the effort meaningless. The variables of nature were impartial. They demanded respect. And Rachel had learned, through years of meticulous practice and guidance from her father, to respect those forces, to anticipate them, and to integrate them into her own precise control. Her colleagues noticed something else as well: her humility. Despite the growing legend of the Armory Angel, Rachel remained grounded. She never boasted about her achievements. She never sought recognition. She returned to her daily routines, polishing rifles, updating ballistic charts, and assisting younger soldiers with patient guidance. For her, mastery was its own reward, and every shot, no matter how impressive, was a continuation of her personal discipline. The backstory of her skill was now known to only a few, but those who understood it respected her even more. The impossible shot was not magic. It was the visible tip of an iceberg composed of years of meticulous practice, mentorship, and mental preparation. And Rachel's calm exterior, the quiet confidence that unsettled even seasoned snipers like Dean, was simply the result of a mind trained to focus under extreme conditions. Even in moments of downtime, Rachel maintained her routines. She reviewed environmental data, practiced sight adjustments, and reflected on previous drills. This quiet devotion to mastery was contagious. Younger soldiers who observed her behavior often adopted some of her methods without fully understanding them. Rachel's influence extended beyond skill alone. It was a lesson in patience, discipline, and the silent pursuit of excellence. Her father's teachings remained a guiding principle. "You don't just shoot to hit," he had told her. "You shoot to understand. You respect the tool, you respect the target, and you respect yourself." That philosophy shaped every aspect of her marksmanship. When Rachel approached the firing range, she wasn't chasing fame, glory, or ego. She was executing a system of respect and discipline, and the perfection of the 3,800-meter shot was a reflection of that ethos. Dean, who had spent years relying on instinct and bravado, now sought her guidance. He understood that her skill was not merely physical but deeply intellectual and spiritual in its execution. Under her mentorship, he began to see the difference between hitting a target and mastering the shot. The precision of distance, the harmony with nature, the mental discipline, these were lessons Rachel imparted quietly, letting observation replace words, and letting results speak for themselves. Even as the base celebrated her achievement, Rachel's mind remained focused on refinement. Mastery, she knew, was never final. There would always be a next challenge, a next variable, a next opportunity to measure patience against precision. Her 3,800-meter shot was not a final destination. It was a milestone in a lifelong pursuit of skill, understanding, and discipline. As the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in shades of red and gold, Rachel stood at the edge of the range, cleaning her rifle, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. Each scratch polished away, each sight carefully adjusted, was a testament to the years of preparation and the lessons of her father. In the quiet of the desert, she felt the culmination of decades of practice, yet remained humble, focused, and ready for the next challenge. The story behind the skill, the years of discipline, mentorship, reflection, and practice, would remain largely hidden to those who only saw the shot. But for Rachel, it was everything. Every calculation, every moment of patience, every detail of the rifle's care had led to perfection. The legend of Rachel was built not just on a single, impossible shot, but on the silent, unrelenting mastery that made that shot inevitable. And as the stars began to emerge over the desert night, Rachel packed her rifle and walked back to the armory, her steps measured and calm, carrying with her the invisible weight of skill, discipline, and the lessons that had made the impossible possible. Weeks had passed since Rachel had completed her legendary 3,800-meter shot. The story had grown across the base and beyond, turning her into a quiet, revered figure among soldiers, trainers, and aspiring snipers. But while others celebrated her accomplishment, Rachel continued her routines in the armory and on the range, refining her skills, cleaning her rifles, and observing the subtle changes in the desert environment. For her, Mastery was a lifelong pursuit, and perfection was never final. Corporal Dean Hawke had been transformed by the experience of witnessing her legendary shot. Initially arrogant and dismissive, he now approached every training exercise with a newfound humility. More importantly, he was curious. Not about fame, not about the legend, but about understanding the method, the mindset, the extraordinary discipline that allowed Rachel to perform what seemed impossible. He wanted to learn. Dean found her one morning in the armory meticulously polishing the stock of her rifle. He hesitated at the doorway, unsure whether to interrupt. "Rachel," he said softly. She looked up, calm and focused. "You're early," she noted without surprise, her eyes measuring his intent. Dean cleared his throat. I want to understand, not just the shot, but everything you do, the way you prepare, the calculations, the focus. Can you teach me?" Rachel regarded him silently for a moment, her expression unreadable. Teaching required patience, precision, and respect, all qualities she demanded from those willing to learn. Dean had demonstrated curiosity, humility, and a willingness to observe, which earned her quiet approval. "Observation first," she said finally. "Learn by watching. The rest comes later." For the next several days, Dean shadowed her. He watched as she cleaned rifles, adjusting screws with care, inspecting the barrel, and methodically checking every component. What seemed mundane to others revealed itself to Dean as ritualized mastery, each motion deliberate, each adjustment meaningful. Rachel spoke little, letting her hands, her method, and her focus communicate the depth of her expertise. Dean began to realize that the skill wasn't just in hitting the target. It was in preparation, discipline, and the respect she afforded her tools. Their training extended to the range. Rachel set up targets at increasing distances, beginning with familiar ranges before pushing further. She emphasized environmental observation, wind patterns, humidity, mirage, even subtle heat shifts that could distort a shot. Dean attempted to follow, but his first rounds were inconsistent, each shot revealing the gaps between his instinctive approach and Rachel's disciplined methodology. "You're rushing," Rachel said quietly, kneeling beside him. She adjusted his grip, the alignment of his scope, and even his breathing. "Patience first. The shot is never in the finger. It's in the preparation, the observation, and the control of your body." Her hands moved with confidence, her touch precise and deliberate. Dean felt a shiver of respect. This was more than technical guidance. It was a philosophy, a way of thinking that challenged everything he had known about marksmanship. As days turned into weeks, Dean's shots improved. Under Rachel's mentorship, he began to understand the interplay between environment and mechanics. He learned to merge his awareness with his weapon, to anticipate the trajectory rather than react blindly. Each successful shot reinforced his respect for Rachel, who remained patient, quiet, and composed. She never praised him, never criticized harshly. She simply guided, letting results speak for themselves. The desert became a classroom. Rachel's instructions were precise, reading the wind, compensating for mirage, calculating bullet drop. Dean noticed the smallest adjustments, tilting the rifle slightly, shifting weight subtly, controlling his heartbeat, each detail crucial for long-range success. Slowly, he began to internalize the discipline that had made Rachel legendary. He was learning not just to hit a target, but to understand it, respect it, and harmonize his actions with the forces of nature. One afternoon, Rachel set up a new challenge. She placed a steel target at 2,500 meters, shorter than her legendary 3,800-meter shot, but still far beyond Dean's comfort zone. "Take your time," she instructed. "Measure the wind, watch the mirage, visualize the shot before you touch the trigger." Dean nodded, his pulse racing. He realized that this exercise wasn't about impressing her, it was about mastering himself. He followed her instructions meticulously, measuring, observing, calculating, and aligning. When he finally squeezed the trigger, the bullet traveled through the shimmering desert heat, rattling the steel target dead center. Dean's heart surged with accomplishment, but he immediately looked to Rachel, who simply nodded, calm and unreadable. There was no celebration, only quiet acknowledgement. That silent approval felt more rewarding than any praise he had ever received. The mentorship deepened over the following weeks. Dean began to anticipate Rachel's instructions, internalizing her approach to patience, observation, and preparation. He realized that her skill was not the result of natural talent alone, but of discipline, study, and respect for both weapon and environment. Each exercise, each minor adjustment, was a lesson in humility and mastery. He started to understand why she had succeeded at 3,800 meters. She respected every variable, controlled her own impulses, and let preparation dictate the outcome. Rachel, too, noticed the change. Dean's posture improved, his shots became consistent, and his mindset shifted from ego-driven confidence to disciplined focus. He was becoming more than a student. He was internalizing her philosophy. Yet she remained quiet, teaching by example, letting observation guide him. The lessons were subtle, almost invisible to those who lacked the patience to notice, but Dean could feel the transformation taking place in every shot, every calculation, every breath. The culmination of this training came when Rachel set up a simulated extreme distance shot. Dean, now confident but aware of his limitations, followed her meticulous preparation. He measured the wind, analyzed the mirage, adjusted his scope, and visualized the trajectory. Rachel observed silently, her expression calm and composed, her hands folded. When Dean finally fired, the bullet hit the target dead center. The impossible had become tangible, a testament to discipline, patience, and mentorship. Dean lowered the rifle, awe and gratitude written across his face. I understand now," he said quietly. "It's not just about hitting the target, it's everything you do before, during, and after the shot." Rachel nodded, her calm demeanor unchanged. "Exactly," she replied softly. "Mastery is never about the bullet, it's about preparation, patience, and respect." As the sun dipped behind the desert horizon, casting long shadows across the range, Dean realized that the lessons he had learned from Rachel extended far beyond marksmanship. He had been transformed by her example, by her quiet mastery, her discipline, and her unwavering focus. He understood that true skill required patience, preparation, and humility, and that every shot, no matter how impossible, was a reflection of one's respect for the process. Rachel, the quiet armory ghost, had not only achieved the impossible herself, but had begun to teach others to understand and respect the same principles. The legend continued, not only through her legendary 3,800-meter shot, but through the students she silently guided, the respect she instilled, and the philosophy she embodied. And as the stars emerged over the desert, Rachel packed her rifle with deliberate care, her calm presence leaving an indelible mark on the minds of those who had been fortunate enough to learn from her. The legend of her skill, tempered by discipline and humility, had grown, but the true story, the story of preparation, patience, and mastery, had only just begun to unfold in the lives of those she taught. The sun had barely risen over the Nevada desert when Staff Sergeant Rachel stepped onto the training range, her rifle slung over her shoulder. The air was crisp, the heat yet to distort the horizon, and the desert stretched like a golden ocean, seemingly infinite. Today was different. Today, the impossible shot that had cemented her legend was no longer a solitary achievement. It was a symbol, a legacy, and Rachel knew it. The soldiers who trained under her had grown in skill, discipline, and patience, and she had come to understand that true mastery was measured not only by what she accomplished, but by what she inspired in others. The story of the 3,800-meter shot had traveled far beyond the base. It had reached other military installations, spread among sharpshooters, and even filtered into popular media, though Rachel herself remained detached from the fame. To her, recognition was irrelevant. What mattered was the enduring principle behind the shot: preparation, patience, and respect. Yet the legend had a life of its own. Students, peers, and superiors alike spoke of her precision, her calm demeanor, and the extraordinary focus that made her seemingly ordinary exterior so deceptive. Corporal Dean Hawk approached her quietly, carrying his rifle. He had grown exponentially under her mentorship, and his admiration for her was no longer tinged with the skepticism of their first encounter. "Morning, Staff Sergeant," he greeted, his voice steady but reverent. Rachel nodded in return, her eyes scanning the horizon. "Morning, Dean. Are you ready for today's exercise?" Dean smiled, a mixture of nerves and determination. "I think I am," he admitted. He understood that this session was more than a test of skill. It was a demonstration of how far he had come under her guidance. Rachel, silent and composed, gestured toward the target at 3,000 meters, shorter than her legendary 3,800-meter mark but still formidable. "Observation first," she reminded him. "Measure, calculate, visualize. Let the shot come from preparation, not impulse." Dean took a deep breath, following her instructions meticulously. He adjusted for wind, mirage, and bullet drop, aligning his scope with precision he had never known before. Rachel watched silently, her calm presence a constant reminder that mastery was as much about mental fortitude as technical skill. When he finally squeezed the trigger, the bullet soared through the shimmering heat and struck the target cleanly. Dean exhaled, a sense of accomplishment washing over him, tempered by the understanding that the process mattered far more than the result. Rachel's influence was evident in every movement of the soldiers under her guidance. She encouraged patience, observation, and respect for the weapon, and her philosophy had become a silent curriculum for anyone willing to learn. She had shown that extraordinary skill was not an accident of talent but the product of discipline, study, and humility. The impossible shot was no longer a solitary legend. It was a living lesson, a testament to the power of preparation and mastery. Even as her reputation spread, Rachel remained grounded. She returned to the armory daily, cleaning rifles, updating ballistic charts, and mentoring others quietly. She had no need for recognition or accolades. Her reward was the quiet knowledge that the next generation of sharpshooters was learning not just how to hit a target, but how to respect the process that made success possible. Her legacy was embedded in their discipline, their focus, and their evolving skill. Outside observers began to take notice. Trainers from other bases requested joint exercises, and Rachel's approach to marksmanship became a model for advanced sniper training programs. Articles in military journals described her methodology, the combination of patience, environmental awareness, and mental preparation, as a blueprint for achieving excellence in extreme-range shooting. Even then, Rachel never sought the spotlight. She let her actions and results speak for themselves, knowing that the true measure of mastery was not fame but influence. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant mountains, casting long shadows across the desert, Rachel reflected on her journey. From the earliest lessons with her father through years of discipline, to the legendary 3,800-meter shot and the mentorship of soldiers like Dean, she realized that her path was defined not by singular achievements but by continuity. The lessons imparted, the skills shared, and the mindset cultivated. True mastery, she understood, was never solitary. It was a legacy that extended through those who followed. Dean approached her that evening, carrying his rifle with careful attention. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, "about how much you've taught me, not just about shooting but about patience, discipline, and respect. I can never thank you enough." Rachel looked at him calmly, a small smile touching her lips. "The lesson is in the action, Dean, not the thanks. Remember that. The shot belongs to preparation, not to the person pulling the trigger." Their conversation was simple, yet profound. Dean had learned that mastery was inseparable from humility, that skill was inseparable from preparation, and that the legend of Rachel was more than a story about a single impossible shot. It was a narrative about the power of focus, the importance of discipline, and the enduring impact of mentorship. Rachel's influence continued to grow. Soldiers who trained under her carried her philosophy into missions, into exercises, and into their own lives. The legend of the 3,800-meter shot became a symbol of what could be achieved through patience and preparation, inspiring countless others to pursue mastery in their own disciplines. Yet Rachel herself remained unchanged. calm, disciplined, and focused, her work in the armory and on the range a daily testament to her principles. The desert, once a silent witness to a legendary shot, had become a stage for ongoing lessons in mastery. Rachel moved through it with the quiet confidence of someone who had achieved the impossible, and yet understood that true success was measured by influence, preparation, and respect. The rifles she maintained, the targets she set, and the students she mentored were all extensions of her philosophy, a living legacy that would endure long after her own career concluded. As night fell, stars glittering over the desert expanse, Rachel packed her rifle and prepared to leave the range. Her steps were measured, her mind calm, yet every movement carried the weight of decades of discipline and mastery. She had achieved what many thought impossible, and in doing so, had ensured that her lessons, her philosophy, and her influence would continue. The legend of Rachel was secure, not merely as a sharpshooter who had achieved the extraordinary, but as a master whose dedication, humility, and mentorship would shape generations to come. And as the wind whispered across the desert dunes, carrying with it the echoes of countless practice shots and whispered lessons, Rachel walked into the night, her legacy embedded in the rifles, minds, and hearts of those who had learned from her, and the story of the impossible shot forever etched into history.